All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. So glad to see you all. I'm Karen Hoskin, the Executive Director of the Cohousing Association, and Coho US is super happy to be able to offer some awesome things like these web chats. You're welcome to go through our website and see information about web chats. I'll share some links later. You also can donate donate to the association for offering these kinds of things. Our plan for tonight is Grace is going to talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll just open it up for questions and discussion. So I would like to introduce Grace Kim. She is an architect and principal at Shibata Workshop, co-founder of Capitol Hill Urban Cohousing, and internationally recognized expert in cohousing. Tonight she's going to be talking about cohousing acoustics. So things such as, are you frustrated by the acoustics in your common house? She's going to share with us some basic design principles and best practices on how to mitigate that. So welcome, Grace.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just start with this image. It's always nice to walk into a common house and feel welcomed for a meal and feel like it's going to be a really nice experience until the people start to arrive. And then pretty soon you'll start to hear sounds of people cutting their food on their plate, the sound of chairs scraping on the floor as people are sliding in and out, people talking, having a convivial meal, and then of course the kids, their high squeaky voices adding to the din of the room. And generally speaking, that is all lovely and welcoming and part of living in community, except that half the time our common houses aren't designed, or I should say, they might have been designed at one time with the acoustics, and yet as budget starts to run lean during construction, the acoustic materials sort of get pitched out the window, and people will say, oh, we'll do that when we move in, which is horrifying for the people that have any moderate level of hearing loss or that are just fatigued by noise like that. So I'm going to just do really quick, because I'm not an acoustic engineer, but just a basic principles of how sound waves work. This is very diagrammatic. So when somebody speaks in a room, the sound travels up and down. If you have two parallel surfaces, floor and ceiling, the sound bounce up and down. And if they hit a surface, they might reflect and come back at you. So if you can imagine adding a group of people, that just adds to the noise and the chaos in the room. So this is what's called having hard surfaces all around. So one of the simple things to do is to provide, to dampen one surface, or to provide some sort of acoustic absorptive material on one of the parallel surfaces. So I'm suggesting the ceiling, because while it would be natural to put carpet on the floor, carpet in a dining room is the most horrific thing. And so putting that at the ceiling plane helps to reduce the amount of reflection, is what the acoustic engineers call it. And so it helps the sound to sort of die out sooner than it would. You can also do that with the ceiling plane. You can change it so that you don't have two parallel surfaces. You now have an asymmetric surface. That also helps to dissipate the sound a little bit more quickly. And if you have a varied plane, then again, it does a similar thing. So it's changing the amount of bounce, if you can call it that the sound will travel, and it also slows down the amount of frequency that it has. So if you have a room that has a flat ceiling and a flat floor, which most always you have a flat floor, then the things you get to work with are the walls. So the same idea applies when you think about a room with two parallel walls. The sound reflection back and forth can be pretty significant if you have drywall or glass or wood paneling on opposite sides of the wall. If you dampen one surface, again, the same idea. If you put some acoustic material, then you can slow down the reflection or reduce the amount of times the sound travels. if you skew one of the walls so it is not parallel, it does the same thing as what we talked about with the ceiling. Oops, going too far. So a couple things, other things to think about. Ceiling height variety also helps with that. So these two have, you know, gabled ceilings. They have a dramatic effect. I'll say that the one on the left has acoustic materials on the ceiling, so it does a better job of reducing the sound reflection. The space on the right, you will see that it's a lovely space, very lovely, but there's a wood ceiling, there's drywall on all of the walls, there's glass where there's not drywall, and then the floor is also a hard surface. So there's no soft surfaces anywhere. The image on the left, actually I'm going to give away something, so I'm not going to talk more about it, but these two spaces also have sort of a variety of ceiling planes. This one is flat, this one has multiple levels, so those all help, and I'm going to give you away the secret. This one has absorptive material in the ceiling as well. Okay, so we're going to play a quick game. Time to play Spot the Acoustic Materials. Okay, so I don't know how we're going to do this since everyone's muted, but we'll try. So if you look at these slides, maybe this will be, I don't know, we don't have to do this as a question thing. So in these slides, these are all ceilings, and I was going to ask if you could spot which ones had the acoustic materials, but since you're all muted, I'm going to just...
I'll just unmute everybody real quick.
Okay. So Jean L. Edwards, do you want to weigh in?
All of them.
She can't hear me. We have to unmute.
Yes, all of them? No, you're unmuted. It's okay.
Oh, well, my guess is that they're all somewhat acoustically padded. If those tiles in there have something behind them, otherwise I would question the one on the upper left.
Okay, great. Yes. So you are absolutely right. All of these are acoustic products. So the one on the lower left and the one on the upper left are probably the most conventional things that you would see, probably oftentimes in an office environment, but I've seen them modified for common houses. The ones on the upper right and the lower left are much more intricate. They have more depth to them. They're also made of absorptive surfaces. Okay, so we're going to do one more. In these images, these are actually common houses. Can people spot the acoustic materials? Judy from Pacific Gardens, do you want to weigh in?
I'd guess that one on the bottom right. I'm guessing. Yes.
Where do you think the acoustic material is?
I'm guessing it's between those rafters.
Like in here?
The white stuff between the rafters, I'm just guessing,
right,
is made of acoustic.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Anyone else have a guess?
I think all of them.
All of them.
Yes, you're on to me. So yes, all of them do. So this one is at Solterra in North Carolina, and I will say they're using the acoustic material that I showed you in this upper left and this, those types of products. What they've done is actually painted them. So I will say these are never intended to be painted. If you paint them, there are paints that will allow you to retain the absorptive material. But if you just take any old Sherwin-Williams paint and paint over it, you've pretty much like negated the whole acoustic benefit to it. So now you have ugly ceiling tiles and they're not doing anything. Okay, so I thought this was a very clever application where they took the acoustic panels and they painted them with a special paint that is supposed to be applied to these, and they've created a checkerboard, so that was quite nice. This is a co-housing community in Denmark, and the acoustic materials are on this part of the ceiling. So they've got an acoustic panel there. They've got these square tiles that are also acoustic, and then this little geometric shape is also acoustic, and there's similar ones like that on all the other roof or ceiling planes. So and then I also see down here on this lower surface, they have acoustic material. So these guys did a good job of providing them on lots of different types of surfaces. As Judy indicated, this one has sort of tectone panels that are located here. And then I gave this one away earlier. This co-housing community has wood slats as their ceiling, but in between you can see a big gap that's probably about 2 inches wide. And that is the acoustic material up above that wood ceiling. Okay, going back to this slide that I showed earlier. So I mentioned that the one on the left has acoustic material. The one on the right does too, but they've carefully hidden them. So I'm just going to point them out. They are these baffles in the rafters and these green panels on the walls. But I will tell you, having been in this space, it is a very acoustically live space, meaning that the sound reflects everywhere, up and down and across. And so these panels, while they might be doing something, the efficacy of them is fairly low. So I'm going to show you one more. So this is our common house. And if I asked you this question, most people would guess that, the acoustic materials, they're on the ceiling. And while yes, they are, our co-housing community, when we first moved in, we had zero budget left. And yet we knew that the meals were really noisy. And so the community decided, okay, we don't have any money, but we'll pool together $500 and we will buy some acoustic ceiling tiles and put them right over the dining table. And that's all we had money to do. So we put them in, and the next meal we had, we realized they did zero. So the next level, the next effort we went to was to actually do the bigger thing that we had originally proposed, but the community thought it was too expensive, and that was to spend about $2,700 and actually cover this whole wall with acoustic felt. And that made a significant difference. And the reason for that is that this material covers the entire wall plane. Whereas this one above, you can see we try to work around the lights. It didn't cover this part of the ceiling over here. There were gaps in between. And that's primarily because that's all of the material that we could afford to buy. Well, in talking with an acoustic engineer, basically this material is only as good as the area that you've covered. And so if you can imagine the sound trying to bounce back and forth, it's not going to bounce in a single line up and down like a ping pong ball. It bounces, and it bounces around. So if it happens to bounce and hit right exactly here, that's great. It might slow it down, and then it might come back, and then it might bounce in the middle and pick up speed again, and then come back down and maybe hit the spot again. So the likelihood that you've got the material in just the right spot is pretty unlikely. So the material that I mentioned to you is an acoustic felt, and I'm not a sales rep for this company or anything like that because there's a bunch of them, but I thought this photo was a little confusing, so I'm going to show you a sample. So this is a sample of the material that we put on the common house walls in the photo I just showed you. It's about 1 inch thick. It comes in different sizes and different colors, and there's different companies, so you can get them in lots of different colors, and you can get them in lots of different thicknesses. So the thicker the material, the more absorptive they are. So it's, in this case, it's a felt with a backing that is, I don't know, some acoustic foam. And the thicker, like this one is about 1 inch thick, and there's an NRC rating of 0.85. The higher the number, and the numbers go to 1. So the closer to 1 you get, the more effective that this is. These aren't super cheap, but I would say that they are super easy to install. So if you can pay for the material, you just basically are gluing it on like you're doing wallpaper, and then you stick it up and you hold it in place for just a bit and let it dry. The nice thing about these is that you can pin to them. So actually the wall behind me is the same material, so you could pin up whatever you want to them, but you also have to remember the more things you pin up, those are creating hard surfaces, and so they're not going to be sound absorptive. But like in this case, they're just pieces of paper, so that's plenty fine. The other nice thing is that you can route out the back of them. So like maybe you can see where we had conduit or wire conduit in the wall that was mounted to the surface, we could cut out a little slot and stick it over the wall or over the conduit so that it laid flush. So it's a pretty handy product, and there's different companies that make it. And you can see on the screen there's lots of different colors that it comes in. And you can do them in, you know, all sorts of shapes and patterns and designs that you want. Another thing to think about is table configuration. So this is a photo of the tables going the long direction, which we do sometimes, especially when we have lots of people that we're trying to accommodate in the common house. And somebody in our community has significant hearing loss. And so when he talked with his audiologist, one of the things that he learned was that this configuration is horrible for sound. One of the reasons is that when you're in a big long table, you're not having small, intimate conversations. You're trying to talk across and trying to talk around lots of people. And so everyone's voices go up higher. He suggested, which is how we actually designed the space, for the tables to go the other direction so that you could limit the number of people to about 6 people at a table. And that way you can then see and hear, visually see eye contact with everybody at the table. And the conversation tends to be more focused and the volume comes down. Okay, one other thing that before we get to questions, one other thing that I thought I would add is, in talking with Spencer, who has the hearing loss, he also shared with me that one of the suggestions of the audiologist was to sit with his back against the acoustic material. So if I was in the dining room and the wall is behind me, that way the sounds that are coming at me, they get absorbed by the wall behind me, and so there's less likelihood of sounds traveling back and forth and making me confused, because that's the problem with people that have hearing loss. And I'm not saying it just for the people that have hearing loss. The people that are hearing abled, it's still confusing, and especially if you're tired or you have a headache or something, your ability to track conversations diminishes when there's lots of things going on, and you will all have experienced that, so you know. So if there is an ability, like in the case of our dining tables, somebody had suggested to Spencer, what if we just took the table and pushed it out so that we could have somebody sitting at the end of each of the tables? And we have not tried that experiment. I think that, you know, he was not so comfortable doing that. That's something that is definitely worth trying. If you can get, especially if you want to get 8 people around a table, it would be easy enough to just scoot this tables out and have a space. Or in the case of our original design, we had planned to do a banquette along the wall, so that would have been the edge of the diner on the end. So some way to have a seat that is sort of back against an acoustic wall. Another suggestion that he made, which I think is really challenged, that his audiologist made that he found very challenging to share, was asking the kids who would sometimes run around. In our common house, we don't have a kitchen, or I mean, we have a kitchen. We don't have a kids' playroom. And so one of the suggestions, because the kids run around and they chase each other and they shriek it inside, it gets quite noisy. And in the summertime, they all go outside and they're running around in the courtyard. But in the wintertime, when it's cold, it's a little challenging. And so the audiologist suggested, well, what if you ask the kids to lower their voices? And all of us, including him, said that's not reasonable. You know, kids aren't doing that because they want to be screaming. They're kids. So I think that's something to think about, is how can you have a conversation with the kids, with the grown-ups, with everybody, to just acknowledge that there is somebody in the community that's having a hard time hearing, and whether they have a hearing loss or not, it can be a community norm to try to make an effort to have lower voices. But I think that is a challenging thing, and I think that's something that in most communities you're going to be wanting the conversation, you're going to be wanting the kids to be around, And so thinking about ways to mitigate that through these other more practical solutions of just applying acoustic material. I think that there's lots of folks that have hoped that there were other ways to get around it, but the reality is sound just travels the way that it does, and unless you do something significant to mitigate that, there's solutions that will help minimize, but it doesn't really address the full problem. So the last thing I would note is that the materials, if you have two parallel surfaces, if you're thinking about walls going this way or this way, you should try to treat one of those parallel surfaces likewise the other direction. And similarly, your ceiling and floor, you should try to minimize or address one of those surfaces. So if you have just a rectangle of a space, then you need to put absorptive material on 3 sides if you can. If you have, roof pitches or walls that flare out, that's helpful. And you also have to be careful if you have a curved ceiling or a dome ceiling that you don't direct sound and sort of funnel it like I can't think of what the effect is, but there's a way that you can make sound travel farther by having a domed surface. So those are just some basic things to think about. Pretty straightforward and easy. I used to think that there would be lots of other solutions, but pretty much the acoustician has made it clear that unless you cover the whole entire surface, you're only doing as good as like the distance that you are. And I say that from the standpoint, one of the things we asked was, could we put the acoustic material here and sort of at like waist level, so that, because that's where the talking sounds were. And he said, well, that would work if people only talked at that level, but if people are standing up, or the chairs that are at the ground surface, or kids that are lower than the table height, none of those things get picked up by having it just in a limited area. So while it's enticing or tempting to say, okay, we don't have the full budget, we're just going to go and do a skimpy version, as I learned from the ceiling exercise, or as my community did, the skimpy version doesn't get you very far. Okay, so that's all I have. It was very brief.
So, Grace, I'll just say, so Karen was asking, and I think you just answered this, do tablecloths, curtains, soft furniture make a difference? And it sounds like what you're saying is it can make a difference, but it's a minute difference. And so if there's really an issue, you really have to like go big. Like you really have to do, is that?
Yeah, if you're at a church or you're in a symphony hall or something like that, and you have hundreds of seats that are upholstered and they're fabric, yes, then there's a difference. But if you're talking about a common house that has 60 chairs, the number of bodies is going to outweigh, and the voices are going to outweigh the benefit of trying to bolster those things.
I'm just curious, and you all can each unmute yourself if you have something, but I'm just wondering, has anybody in their community done something for sound mitigation and have either had fantastic success or learned that it really didn't help? I'll just share one that I observed. I cannot remember where I saw this. It was somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, and I got to visit a community, and we came in kind of the back kitchen door, and they were showing off their kitchen, and then you kind of went from the kitchen through like a butler's pantry where they kept the dishes and stuff, and then into the dining room. And as we were walking through, I saw this giant basket on the floor full of tennis balls. And being a dog owner, I was like, oh, wow, how cute. Like, they have toys right inside the back door. And then I walked into the dining room and realized that every single dining room chair had a tennis ball on the bottom of it, so that when you pushed your chair in and pulled it out, that it didn't make noise, theoretically.
Yeah. And that works. And there's an aesthetic decision about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing you said about the curtains, I would say that if you had very sort of thick, heavy curtains that were maybe velvety or something that was absorptive, and they covered the full ceiling to floor and went the whole width of the wall, that would start to have some effect. It would probably be like a really thin version of this. Obviously there's no acoustic foam that would back it, but I've also seen something like this in more of a fabric-y way that would hang, that would also serve that purpose. But I would say traditional drapes with the, sheer liners, that's not enough.
What about, somebody has a question about the ceiling baffles, like the ones that Durham Co-Housing has.
Mm-hmm. What about them?
Effective? Are the ceiling baffles effective?
Yep, I would say that they're effective if you cover the whole entire ceiling. So if I go back here, so this ceiling treatment is along the whole, so it's the common house or the dining room has a ceiling that has this shape. And so that acoustic material covers the whole ceiling surface. So that works quite well. And I think that this was a good installation. It was probably a fairly inexpensive installation. I would say normally when I've seen this in common houses, I didn't show you really bad examples, and I've seen them. I've seen this in bad examples, and it looks like an office cafeteria or something like that. So I think this was a clever solution of putting it on an angle and painting that so that it provides some visual interest at the ceiling.
I saw something online about light fixtures over tables that are really irregular and can move the sound. Have you seen those? Like different kinds of light.
No,
They're similar to that thing that you showed on the ceiling that was different levels and angles. So there are light fixtures like that can, I mean, they're not like that, but they're similar to that. That can be used.
I could imagine that. Yeah, I could imagine like this light fixture has a concave surface to it. So I guess if a light fixture was large enough and had some sort of acoustic baffles in it, that it could be. I've never seen that, but that sort of makes sense. But again, it would only really address the area right below it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that something else that that affects sound, which you wouldn't imagine, but it kind of does. And if you can think about going out to a dinner where they lower the lights, I would say lighting levels do affect sound. And so, I don't know if I have a picture. Oh no, I do. In this community, so the light fixtures are right low, and I would say this is true of most communities I visited in Denmark. The light fixtures are right over the table, and so it creates like a little room around the table. And you can see in this room, there's a little bit of lighting at the middle that shines kind of over the main walking path. But over this area, over the tables, there's only these pendant fixtures that hang down over the tables. And having that low-level lighting at the table also helps to reduce sound. And I'm not exactly sure what the psychology is around that, but it definitely works. Like even in our community, when we turn off the overhead lights and we put the twinkly lights on, we've left those up for a couple months now after the holidays because somebody put them up for a party and then never took them down. And so at dinner time, sometimes we'll just leave those lights on as the dinner lights. And I've noticed that on those evenings, the room seems quieter than when the lights are, on full. So lighting does make a difference.
What other questions are there? Or observations or things that you've tried and it worked or didn't work in your own community? So Grace, Pacific Garden says they have an acoustical challenge in their dining room. We also have one in our atrium. We have glass-covered pedestrian street that runs down the center of the building, similar to Windsong in Vancouver. The atrium magnifies the sound of the children running and playing. Fair warning to others.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah, is there anything that could be done in an atrium? Like, I mean, I guess things like large plants and things could help.
Yeah, plants don't help as much as we have been. I think that everybody shares, including myself, shares that idea that plants help reduce sound, but they actually don't. If you think about it, they don't have any mass. So the reason that these things work is that it's not just the felt on the surface, it's this thickness. Like I said, the thicker you go, the more absorptive the material is. So a leaf doesn't have that mass behind it to actually absorb the sound. So I could see that being challenging if you have, you know, a gable or a sloped ceiling or atrium space, and I'm guessing that the ground plane is then like concrete or some sort of hard surface. You're just getting the sound bouncing all over the place, and there's no place for it to stop. I suppose if you, I don't know, you'd have to do some sort of like indoor-outdoor carpet. You could do that along the whole length. That would be quite expensive, but that would certainly help reduce the sound. You could put in some, I was going to say sofas, but that doesn't really make sense. Some sort of seating along the edge that could help, but that would have to be consistent all the way along the edge, or something on the walls. On this, if the atrium, if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like maybe there's homes on either side of the atrium space, and if the parallel wall surfaces, if one of those wall surfaces could get some sort of acoustic treatment. I don't know how realistic that is, given that it's probably, I'm guessing it's a semi-conditioned space. Do you want to unmute yourself, Judy?
Sorry, Grace, I didn't hear what you said. A what space?
Oh, a semi-conditioned space. So I'm guessing that you don't have heating or cooling in that space.
Oh, we do. I mean, we keep the temperature like not real warm, but we do heat it some in winter.
Okay. And is the roof, the ceiling, is it watertight, that you don't get any leaks inside?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Then if that's the case, you might try thinking about an acoustic material on one of those wall surfaces. That might help, but you'd have to do it from the top all the way down the bottom.
Right.
So that's, yeah.
The other thing we're thinking of experimenting with, just doing a test case in one home. We have single pane windows that face onto that pedestrian street, and we're thinking of putting in double pane windows in one home, and we're doing it in the home of someone who's one of the more sensitive people to the sound of children playing, etc. And we want to find out if that will make a difference for those residents in that home. So I don't know, I guess we'll find out.
So your concern is not so much about the noise level in the atrium, but the noise level in the home.
Yeah, because people hear it even in their homes, you know, yeah.
I see, yeah. So that's actually a different thing. I would say that the windows will help tremendously. Yeah. If they're single pane glass, then I'm gonna guess that they're, yeah, that would be a big difference. I would say double pane, and that might not be enough. It might be triple pane if you'd want to eliminate the sound altogether. But I don't know where you are, Judy, but do you have? I'm presuming that the home has some sort of heating system or that allows for fresh air to circulate through the house, so you're not relying on the windows for circulation?
Yeah, that's right. In our homes, we have heat recovery ventilators. So we're on Vancouver Island, so we have a Pacific Northwest type climate.
Great. So do those heat recovery ventilators exit out into, they must exit out the backside to the outside?
Backside to the outside, yeah.
Yeah, as long as you don't have any openings in the building that faces into the atrium, if you were to replace the windows, that should do quite a lot. It's whenever you have an opening or if somebody leaves the windows open, that's where that air sitting benefit will go away.
Okay.
But that should dramatically change things. And also at the door, the front door, if you were to seal around the door, so there's not a gap underneath or a gap on the sides of the doors, that would also help.
Right.
And that's a much easier problem to solve than the sound in the atrium itself.
Right, right. Thanks, Grace.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions or observations? So Grace, I'm curious, in your designs going forward from your own experience, is some sort of acoustical stuff recommended, or is it more trying to design the space so that nothing is complete, parallel?
I would say that we would probably assume acoustic materials because it's depending on the site and the and even when you have all the rooms built, having non-parallel surfaces isn't always possible, and it's not always the most economical. I feel like these days everyone's working within tight budgets, especially in our area, but even elsewhere. The construction climate is so heated that we're trying to be really efficient with the design and make it as cost effective. So that doesn't really lend itself to having a vaulted ceiling or to having, walls that are kind of out of plane. And even when you have that, I think I would still recommend putting an acoustic material because it just helps enhance the acoustic benefit. So I would say the thing that I would recommend is to not allow that to be cut from a budget, because the common house and the dining experience is so much an integral part of building community. And for people, even if it's one person, to feel fatigued and to feel discouraged from coming to a meal, I think really impacts the community and the community building in a significant way. So I would say best practice is to make sure that the design includes that, but then to make sure that you champion that through and make sure it gets included in the final build and not value engineered out when you need to say, save 10,000 here or 10,000 there. Mm-hmm. That something else should go instead of that. Mm-hmm.
Since there's no one talking, can I say something again?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to kind of reinforce what Grace has said, because if a dining room is echoey and loud, what I find is that people come to the community meal and they eat, but they kind of wander off and leave soon after the meal. And I've read Chuck Durrett saying that it makes a big difference to people's lingering after the meal, if it's, if the acoustics are good. Yeah. And I guess the other thing Chuck said was that people aren't even conscious of it necessarily. It's just they do it without even knowing why they're doing it, but that is why they're doing it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I would say when you don't have the acoustics right even people that don't have hearing loss find themselves fatigued and tired, and they will, without knowing why they're doing it, they will leave a meal quickly and or avoid meals because it's too difficult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about having you know, the kitchen open to the dining room versus closed off?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you have the residential appliances, meaning like a dishwasher that's fairly quiet, that you can turn on and leave on, that's all good to have an open kitchen. I think if you have commercial dishwashing equipment, it's really challenging to have it open and not address acoustics in any way. That will most certainly chase people out of the common house, to have, you know, people doing the dishes in that loud cycle every 3 seconds, for 3 seconds every couple minutes. I also think that there's a fair amount of, even if you have quiet dishwashing equipment, there's still a fair amount of banging around with pots and pans. That just happens when you've got big stock pots and things to wash one at a time. So I think, and generally speaking, kitchens don't really have soft absorptive surfaces. That doesn't make sense for keeping a kitchen clean. So I think it's really something to think about. I think if it's designed as if it's one big space, like the one on the image on the right, the kitchen is part of the overall dining space. And that's very much the same in my community, where it's just all in the same space. I think then you can treat the room as one room. But if you have, let's see if I have any pictures of them. No, I don't. Yeah, if you have the, like in the photo on the right, the kitchen is a separate room altogether. And it does open up into the dining space, but it's a fairly small opening or aperture into the bigger dining space. And I can't remember where their dishwashing, and their dishwashing equipment is in a separate room again. So I think in that case, when it's a kitchen and a dining room separate, when you have that opening into the kitchen, I think you need to be careful about what activities are happening there. And when it's dishwashing is a separate activity in a separate space, then it's easier to imagine having the kitchen be open like that, and being able to manage the sound.
Other questions?
Catherine, did you have any specific questions?
So I'm actually here with Diana, who's sitting right there, and we so she had a question about furniture and whether furniture makes a difference with sound, right?
Yep. Yeah, I guess thinking about furniture that slides easier. So the photo on the right shows chairs that have the 4 legs. And to Karen's point, this is probably the type of chair, this or any sort of number of chairs, or like chairs like this. Those are probably the types of chairs that Karen saw, the little balls on the end of the tennis balls on the feet, because there's 4 things that can basically slide and make scrapey sounds. There are other chairs that have what are called sled bases. So instead of having the 4 legs like this, the 2 legs might be connected by a piece that goes across the bottom. So it's like, that's why it's called a sled. Those might be a little better in terms of sound, because that flat bottom helps for the chairs to slide a little better, I would imagine. there's usually like some sort of grippy material on the bottom as well. That's just a supposition. I don't know that for sure, but I would say anything that has, you know, a hard back isn't super helpful. I wouldn't say that, I mean, you could certainly try to do upholstered furniture, but like I said earlier, unless you had 100 of these upholstered chairs in your dining room, unoccupied, then it probably won't do anything, or it won't be significant enough, I should say, right?
And your comment about sort of in commercial grade carpeting in a dining space, what was that you said?
Oh, that wasn't in the dining space. That was, Judy was asking specifically in a semi-exterior space that she has in their community where there's a sort of a central atrium.
But you don't recommend any kind of carpeting in the dining space?
I'm not a really big fan of carpeting in the dining room just because of how easily it soils. Although having said that, I will say that I just went to PDX Commons in Portland, and they just installed a very, very low pile. In fact, it was like almost a zero pile carpeting that basically looked like felt on the ground. And I could see something like that. It was a fairly dark color. I could see something like that holding up fairly well. If you do it in carpet tiles, so that if, you know, somebody spilled like a big thing of coffee or something or red wine and it stained, that you could just remove the tile and replace it. I could see doing something like that, but generally speaking, I would not really encourage it. If it was a senior-only community, I could maybe see that a little bit more, but that's not to say that seniors don't trip and spill wine as well, so I don't know. Yeah, I'm usually in favor of something that's a little bit easier to clean, which is why I'm suggesting putting the material on the ceiling plane.
And
yeah.
Your favorite is that felt stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I like it because it's quite effective. In this photograph, actually, there is acoustic ceiling in most of the ceiling. You can see there's like a little strip right here that we did off of, but the majority of the ceiling has an acoustic tile that's basically just glued to the ceiling. So it's effective, and in this case, it's sort of non-invasive and sort of not really noticeable. But I think depending on the lighting and depending on some other things, sometimes that acoustic treatment doesn't look so nice.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I think you're trying to achieve a sense of hominess and a sense of warmth and a residential quality more than sort of a cafeteria kind of commercial quality in the dining. But I've also seen lots of other, I mean, if you Google and look online, there's lots of, you know, examples of like undulating things that are acoustic ceiling tiles that you can install. That's great to have a lot of height to work with in your ceiling. So there are certainly other options other than the felt. The felt is like my new favorite fun thing. But it's also very, very active. Yeah. Anything else? I will say I like this format. I feel like I'm in everybody's home right now. It's quite nice to look at the shots of you all.
Doing this.
You can't hear us. Thank you so much for doing this, Grace.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So I just put some links in the chat. First off, yes, thank you so much, Grace. You actually, I have some ideas that I'm gonna try and propose. Thank you guys for coming and being here. I put some links into the chat. So the first one is if you would like to donate to the association. The next one is National Co-Housing Open House Day is coming up Saturday, April 27th this year. So either open the doors of your own community, go visit some communities close by, anything like that. There's some information on the website about that, and you can kind of sign your community up so people know that it's open doors and can come and visit. I put a link in the chat about the upcoming Portland conference, which the conference itself is June 1st and 2nd in Portland, Oregon, and there's some pre-conference intensives and tours being offered Thursday and Friday, May 30th and 31st. It is going to be an absolutely fabulous conference. Grace is one of the co-chairs, actually, and it's gonna be really good. So I hope you guys come.
Great.
Yeah. I also put a link in there to the web chat. So the next scheduled web chat is next week. Yeah. Wednesday, March 13th, same time, so 5 p.m. Pacific, etc. And Karen Gimnick will be presenting about contracting in regards to facilitation. So how clear contracting within your community can make meetings more efficient and effective. Also on that web chats page is past web chats videos or slideshows or documents that were shared, and then the upcoming schedule. So I think that's about it. Did anybody have any questions? All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. And Grace, thank you. We'll see you in Portland.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.